Alright, so now we got a couple of what I guess you would call world-building sci-fi movies. Those movies that a lot of people seem to like quite a bit, despite the fact that a lot of their runtimes are devoted to basically just explaining their concepts and trying to work out the rules of the world while also trying to answer all the audience's questions at the same time. And it doesn't often work out for movies that are kind of just one standalone movie. It's the whole. It's usually them trying to set up some sort of franchise or something, and more often than not, that doesn't pay off. So you just end up with one movie that's just a shitload of exposition for no particular reason, or a real big payoff or anything like that. Um, well, I guess you could put both of these under that umbrella, but it just so happens that one of them might work significantly more than the other. So let's go through those two. And I think I want to start with the Tomorrow War. And the reason for that is before I even went into this, it got really popular really fast, like as soon as it dropped on Prime. And the thing about it was, even though it was really popular, the thing that I kept hearing was a lot of complaints, where it was like it's really derivative of all sorts of stuff, like Edge of Tomorrow was mentioned, Aliens is mentioned a lot. The opening scene is literally the opening scene of Predators, where they're just falling out of the sky, and the audience doesn't know why yet, but, for some ensuing battle, obviously. And and there's so much in this already, just looking into it, that is something I'm not particularly big on, or something that I'm usually criticizing other movies for, whether it be Chris Pratt being the lead, or the fact that you can name like a billion other movies for every scene you see is like, oh, this is that movie, and that is clearly that movie, and it doesn't seem to have any particular originality to it. Everything just reminds you of something else, and it's almost like they're trying to live off of that throughout the whole thing. Um, and all that stuff I mentioned before. So I'm really quite baffled as to how the Tomorrow War ended up working for me. I don't know. I don't know what happened, but I guess we can go through it and see. There's cliche characters everywhere. Everything is something that we've seen before. There is really nothing new here whatsoever. And let it be like the character types or the relationships some characters have with other characters, it's all covered ground. And it was one of those cases where it had barely been out for like the weekend that it came out, and they were saying, well, when we're moving on to a sequel now, like it's already been greenlit, we're good to go, it's that popular already. And it just immediately that already, like that on top of the supposed derivative nature and all that, I really didn't go into this positive. Like I tried not to let things surrounding it affect how I feel about it, but there was just so much. Just seemed like it was. This just spelled that I wasn't going to like this at all. Maybe that helped. I guess like maybe the bar was just so low. But I was surprised by how really into this I was, and relatively quickly. Like the length. The length is another thing where I'd be criticizing another movie, and it's always something that kind of puts a heaviness in me when I'm going into something that I already feel like I'm not gonna like, and it's like a length. I think it's like somewhere between 215 and 220 is where the length is, which is a lot for a movie like this. Um, but yeah, and the fact that a lot of that is going to be exposition and them trying to set up these rules that may or may not completely make sense. It's going to be one of those movies where we actually have characters whose sole purpose is to say, like, somebody will be explaining the rules of what's going on, and somebody will say, oh, but what about this? Like, can you not just do this thing? Basically asking all the questions the audience would be. And it's and there's just so much of that's basically becomes what the movie is just set up. So there's really no reason this should work. But it was somewhere in like the 35-minute area of this runtime, where I was just kind of like, all right, I think I might actually be fine with this. It'll probably be over long, But I might be fine with this, and that I was surprised by how much that turned out to be. Like usually at some point, whether it be in like the middle or somewhere, it would start to like run out of gas or run out of ideas or lose anything good that it might have had. But it kind of keeps going at a pretty decent pace, especially for how long it is. Um, and it comes from, I guess, one thing you can throw in there that would make that make sense is that Chris McKay is the director, and even though this is a live action movie, um, talking about the fact that Chris McKay did the Lego Batman movie, but there is still something there that makes sense in retrospect about how the Lego Batman movie is even being an animated movie versus a live action movie. The Lego Batman movie never stopped ever. Like it was just constant things all the way through in a really good way. Like that can be obnoxious or maybe too much, but the Lego Batman movie really found a certain way to do that, and it's just you're just constantly taking it in, and every few seconds is something amazing. And you get a sense where while this certainly isn't on like that level, I was really surprised how much it was able to keep up what it was doing without really feeling like it was running out too much. Um, but in that first, before we reached about that 35-minute mark, though, my concerns were definitely there. Where we do have the big opening scene where they're dropping out of the sky, and we don't know what's going on as an audience. And then we immediately get a cut, and it says like 28 years earlier. But Chris Pratt still looks like Chris Pratt. So you're kind of waiting for the certain explanations that are going to be coming, and like I said, this is one of those things, especially when you're doing the whole showing a later scene as the opening scene and then cutting back, and there can be you can almost see it as like a lack of confidence, like they didn't have something to start the story off that's actually the start of the story, that would be intriguing. But given the I guess time angle of this movie, I guess technically that still is the start of the story. We just have to get there after introducing Chris Pratt and the other characters. Um, and 28 years earlier is next year, 2022. So, which is where we're like starting. And it's one of those cases where obviously it's going to be the guy that isn't really suited for this whole battle scenario. He's like a regular dude. He's a science teacher, um, and he's just kind of normal. But of course, this is a movie starring Chris Pratt, so of course this normal guy who's this science teacher also takes off his shirt a lot and looks like he lives in a gym. So there's that whole thing. He does say later briefly that he's ex-military, so that could explain that. Like I said, it's not impossible that a science teacher could be jacked or anything, but there's a difference between this guy goes to the gym and he looks like he lives in the gym. There's two different things there. Um, but whatever. It's a Chris Pratt movie, so we have to go with that. Apparently, that's who this guy is. This normal guy. So when we get the introduction of what exactly the war here is, it is this really interesting scene on a soccer field, where everybody's watching this game, and then where they literally come out of the future to tell us that there's an alien invasion. Most of us are probably dead, so they need to bring people in from the past, which is our present, to go to the future to fight this off. And there's some interesting stuff in there about how, about running into your past self is never going to happen, because they go and they get younger people, and they get people kind of in Chris Pratt's age range, because there's no thing about running into your future self in regards to the whole thing of people are either dead or they haven't been born yet, are the ones that are going forward. So they do set up a lot of interesting rules in this concept, and there's like a lot of it when I talk about movies that try to do this whole world building thing, but it just feels like you're getting bombarded with information, and it's not like you're gonna remember like every single detail of it anyway. But here they have enough interesting ideas that don't feel completely ripped off, that I think I was able to put aside, I guess, a bias against this sort of setup and this whole making their own concept as much as they can thing, and making so many rules and asking so many questions and all that other stuff. Um, but what's interesting is when you look at something like Infinite, which we'll get to, that's almost a case where the runtime kind of helps also, because if you have like a short movie where you're trying to do all this build up, that's there's definitely not going to be a payoff. There's not going to be there's going to be one small climax, and that will hopefully have paid off everything they built up for like an hour and 20 minutes or more. So this one does give itself the time to do all of this, and set up some characters here and there. Like I said, not necessarily like riveting characters necessarily. You've got Sam Richardson doing the comedy relief, and you've got Edwin Hodge being like kind of the badass of the group, the experienced one. Um, Marilyn Rice Cub is in there for like a second. They build her up like she's gonna be one of the main characters, and then I think she got off early, but I say that with a question mark because I don't remember that happening. She just kind of wasn't there after a while. It was probably something happened in the chaos that I just missed. Um, but yeah, so that was random. But um, going into that, there's also going into character stuff. There is another big cliche here in regards to the estranged father, and whether or not that's going to come back into play. And normally this is a plot line that I wouldn't care for. It'd be like, oh, who gives a shit? We've seen this thing over and over again, and oh, he's going to have to eventually go to his father for help. They're going to have to work out their shit and all that, and we've seen all this before. But the thing that makes that a little better here is that the father is J.K. Simmons. And not like typical, dad J.K. Simmons. Not like Juno's dad, J.K. Simmons. This is like jacked warrior J.K. Simmons. So that added something to the mix that was really fun. Even though he has limited screen time when he is here, he makes the most of what is otherwise that very cliche story, or that cliche plot thread, whatever. Um, I struggle to call it a plot thread since it's barely there, but it serves its purpose. So there's that. There is something else that they do here, which is interesting because it's there's something that happens quite early that could probably you can imagine having been a twist towards the end. But the thing is like if I feel like they knew and they were able to think ahead in kind of a smart way to where it's like if they had saved this particular reveal for the end, it's something we would have figured out long before they told us. And it wouldn't have had any impact whatsoever. So I kind of like that before we're even really thinking ahead to anything, they just go ahead and say, oh, by the way, this is that. Like, this is what's happening with this. And they make it kind of a big emotional beat at a time that's still relatively early. Which is, like I was saying, is actually good for the pacing and where things happen here, because it's like, this is about the time where we might be kind of getting, like, we've had a couple of action scenes now, we might be a bit tired of it. And then they just go through, battle strategies and shit, and keep building up to the next action scene or whatever. So to put this moment where they put it, was actually kind of skillfully done, and kind of keeps you in it, without having to constantly do the whole, because usually the way movies like this try to keep you in it is just, oh, here's more action, and more action, and more action. So to do this here in this moment, and to be able to use that, now that they've set it up this early, the fact that they can use it throughout the story is something that they would have not had if they had like waited towards the end to show that off or something, or reveal that. So I think that helped a lot in regards to how well this flows in general. And the way that we're able to have those moments makes it feel the action still feels nonstop pretty much, but it has those moments in between it just enough that I don't recall really getting tired of the action, which is crazy because I almost always end up eventually tired of the action in movies like this, especially when it's just sort of chaos and a bunch of random monsters or whatever. So that's another thing that was kind of surprising, was not getting tired of the action, despite how much there is of it. But I think the thing that they found in order to do that well was that usually it's just like, here's another action scene, and here's another action scene, and so on. But those little moments in between the action set up just enough that, like, every individual action scene or every individual battle scene has its own purpose in the context of what's going on. Like, it's not just, oh, here's all these battle scenes because we're in a war. There's this one particular objective for this action scene, and then the next action scene has one particular objective. And sometimes it's, an objective of the humans doing a particular thing. Sometimes it's the monsters are trying to do a particular thing, and that's the objective in it. And I just found that really, like, it's just such a great flow of action throughout it, and it's like I can't get over the fact that that it actually works, for me anyway. But you are gonna watch this happen. There's like movies like this people typically love, and I hate them. Now that I really like this one, people are probably gonna like turn on it and hate it. Which I'm totally expecting. That shit happens all the time, but for some reason I'm on some totally separate wavelength from like most people when it comes to most movies like this, and whatever. But so yeah, and it's as far as it being a straight to streaming movie. If I remember correctly, it was made for theaters, and it was COVID that got it just put straight to streaming. What's interesting about that is this definitely does feel cinematic enough that you totally get a made-for-theaters vibe, which is great for a streaming movie. There are maybe a couple of moments here and there, and some action scenes even, where I maybe kind of got a straight-to-streaming vibe. I don't really quite know how to explain that, like what that is, but I imagine most people have both been to the movies long enough and been streaming long enough that you can get a sense of what I probably mean by when something seems like it's straight to streaming versus being made for theaters. But for the most part, this has a really cinematic vibe to it that I was really liking. So I guess the only other thing to really go into is the climax, which once again was a big test, because it's like, for the movie this long and this much action in it, like I've been saying, usually eventually it runs out, and usually by the time we get to a climax, it's like, well, I'm kind of ready to be done with this now. So climaxes in movies with this much action are really hard to pull off because you've just been so worn down already. It's like by the time you get to what's supposed to be the big moment, you're kind of just done with it. But I wasn't, and I think it's the inclusion of the J.K. Simmons character helps this a lot. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was kind of starting to feel like it was a case where they have to do something with time before we go into the climax. And it's like, what happened before this moment already kind of felt like a climax. Like, it would have been the climax of a shorter movie. So it was like, when it was like, oh, now we gotta do this thing, and then you realize that a whole other climax is coming, that's when you're kind of like, oh god. And you start to, wear down and feel that fatigue. But once the climax started actually going towards where it was, I was into it again. And the climax is really cool and really satisfying. So, yeah. And obviously it is apparently setting up for this sequel. I don't know, it seemed pretty like, this could have been, by the ending, this could have been a standalone movie. But obviously they're already planning a sequel because of its success, and I'm kind of not mad about that. Like, I'm not, like, excited. I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to see what they're going to do next, even though I really like this movie, believe it or not. But it's, like, I don't really care one way or the other that there's going to be another one, but I won't go into it with dread, based on this one, unless there's, like, bad early word or something, which there totally could be. But it's, we'll see. The fact that they were able to make it as long as they did, and set up the climax the way they did, and I never got, like, tired of it, makes me very interested to see what other ideas they might have. So, yeah. So, like, I'm not like, oh my god, I need a sequel now, but, I have more faith in them than I did, before I saw this. So, yeah, so despite all the things that could be put against it, I actually realized I could see myself watching it again, which is kind of crazy. So, yeah, so that's how I feel about that. Now, on the other side of all that stuff I said, that is usually stuff that I don't like in movies, somehow working for the Tomorrow War. A lot of that is here too in Infinite. Antoine Fuqua's new movie with Mark Wahlberg and Chiwetel Ejiofor. So, going into it, I actually had I'd heard some negative things about it, just vague negative things about it. I didn't really know much about what it was or what its concept was. Oh, but don't worry, it's going to spend the whole runtime telling you what its concept is. But because it's one of those. But I went in with some positivity because Antoine Fuqua doesn't make movies as good as he used to. Um, but I still have like a confidence in his name when I see it. Like it'll be worthwhile in some way, as far as like action movies go, because that's basically what he seems to be doing now. And it's him and Wahlberg reteaming after Shooter, which is really cool. I don't think I've seen it since it came out, but I remember liking it pretty well. Um, but yeah, immediately, just as soon as it fades in at the very start, it's one of those movies where we're getting concept narration, where the very first thing you hear is, okay, everybody, strap in and listen very carefully because I'm about to tell you what the whole concept is. And it's and I talked about this with like Looper, where Looper managed to do this really well, where it was kind of explaining but also showing at the same time, and there's like this really cool opening scene to Looper, that gives us the whole idea, and there's a lot of things going on here, but yet it's the way Johnson put all that together. It's able to really, you can really digest it easily, and be able to carry those things throughout the movie, all the terminology and all that other shit, that you're usually bombarded with. Looper proves that there is a way to do that smoothly. The problem is that most movies don't find it. Most movies don't have that smoothness when they're trying to lay out a concept, especially right away. Like, Infinite's not even interested in showing us anything before it starts telling us what the concept is. Um, and I've talked about that a lot before, where it's about how the movie basically lives off of its concept, and it's like, oh, if we throw this idea at you that sounds really original, and like we've really created our own thing, that'll basically make us sound smart, and we can just go off of that. And the audience will think that we're ahead of them the whole time. Like if they can't keep up with us, it's not because we're bombarding them with useless terminology and a whole bunch of other like concepts that the movie will barely even go into, that you don't even really need to know about. And it's like it's not that we're just so far ahead of the audience has to keep up with us. Yeah, it's their problem. But no, that's not, that's not the way it goes. Um, so it's basically what Infinite basically feels like, as far as its world building and setup, is basically those young adult novels like the Maze Runner and shit like that, where most of it is just like, oh, this is our and they keep giving stuff terms that really doesn't need terms. Um, it's like I always go back to that scene in the first Maze Runner movie where there's just like spinning things that don't serve too much. Like they just have to serve their own purpose. It doesn't matter to the other characters what these are as long as they serve their purpose. And the guy says something like, "These are these things. We call them blades." And it's like, why the fuck? Who cares? Why do you just keep throwing shit at us like that does not matter? You just wanted to make it sound like you have as much information as possible, and that's really adding to your atmosphere. But it's not. It's fucking useless, and there's only so much that we can take all at once when we're only trying to focus on one story and one movie. We don't care about what you want to do in the future right now. Just set up this for now. We can deal with all that shit later, if it even happens at all. Um, and I don't think that's going to happen for Infinite. So, I mean, this is another one where it really seems like it's trying to build up some sort of franchise or something, but where the Tomorrow War got greenlit for another one immediately, I don't think that's going to be happening for Infinite, at least as far as I know. Um, so, after they do that, they do the other thing that's really annoying about movies like this, and that's throwing a contextless action scene at us immediately that is super, super chaotic, and it's basically made just to pull you in, just to give the audience something to look at immediately, to give them the impression that the movie has hooked them. Even if that's not exactly what's happening, it's just a whole bunch of it's Dylan O'Brien is in a car chase, and like I said, there's a whole lot of chaos, and it almost kind of looks like a Zack Snyder action scene. Whether you think that's a positive thing or a negative thing, it's entirely up to you. But it reminded me of a Zack Snyder action scene. And it's so there's going to be occasional slow-mo for no particular reason, but it's also going to be very dark, and there's going to be a lot happening at once. And but the thing is this is also one of those movies where when it starts with a scene like this, you know that if you've seen enough movies like this, you know you only have to pay attention, like half pay attention to this opening action scene, because number one, it's only here to basically hook the audience, in big quotes, hook. But anything that's crucial about it, we're going to cut back to anyway. There's going to be a scene later when they're talking about something that makes this scene significant suddenly, and we're just going to cut back to the scene and they're going to show us again. So, these opening action scenes, they don't fucking matter. They never have. They'll extract all the information later, and then we'll deal with it then. But in the meantime, noise, chaos, I guess equals, oh, I'm into this immediately. But not really. So, then we meet Wahlberg's character, and I don't really know what's, like what people know going into this and what might be considered a spoiler or something, I don't know. But I don't think so, because it's literally the concept. The whole concept being that there are these people that are reincarnated, and there's the good side and there's the bad side. There's the heroes and there's the villains, and they're both doing the thing where they've been reincarnated down the years, but the war continues on between them. Like, their reincarnated selves are still fighting through every different reincarnation, and are in the past it was apparently this has been on for like centuries. But as far as the opening scene, our hero was Dylan O'Brien, and the villain was Rupert Friend. Rupert Friend, who I don't even remember having any lines in this. But he's got like a major credit at the end as if he's a major character. He is a major character, but we only really see him as his past here. And then that hero and that villain in this current incarnation are Wahlberg and Chiwetel Ejiofor as the villain. So, but Wahlberg is under the impression that he's a normal guy with schizophrenia, but in actuality, he's having flashes of his other pasts, particularly this Dylan O'Brien one that's going to bleed into the plot of this movie because of an egg. Yeah, this is another kind of fatal error of these movies, is there's so much concept, there's so much they want to build, there's so much they want to tell us about all these little individual details, but yet the plot is just going to center around like one random object. And it's like, despite all of this, the plot is so stupidly simple that it's another thing where it's just like, what was all this for, really? Like, what is all the dressing for? To show off, we've got to get what they refer to the whole movie as the egg. How riveting does that sound? And this egg has powers. Like, it's gonna... Chiwetel wants it because it's basically going to end this whole reincarnation thing or something. Some bullshit like that. So, and he's constantly trying to see, like, the face of God. Like, he wants to reach the end of this in this really profound way. So, in order for him to reach God, to see the face of God, he does weird shit, like being in these places that look ancient, and he... if I saw this correctly, and I heard this correctly, he's having his people waterboard him with gas. And Chiwetel's really, kind of getting into this to his credit. Like, he's like, this script is... I don't exactly have to bring my A game to this, but I'm going to bring something to this. So he went all in, and he's doing the big villainy thing. And it's really funny because as I was watching him get waterboarded with gas in hopes of seeing the face of God, and being really over the top while doing it, my immediate thought was, this was made for the How Did This Get Made podcast. The podcast with Paul Scheer and June Diane Raphael and Jason Mantzoukas, where they talk about movies like this and these bad movies, and they dissect them for like an hour and a half, and it's like one of the best podcasts ever. And I was like, this was made for that, where they like joke on it and they riff on it and they do all that stuff, and they try to decipher how it possibly could have made its way to the screen. And then lo and behold, Jason Mantzoukas is actually in this movie. So now I desperately want to see that podcast actually talk about one of the movies that one of their members is in. And I would like this movie to be a jumping off point for that. So, and yeah, and then basically we're getting, like, where I was talking about with the Tomorrow War, where there's, a lot of action throughout. But like every action scene kind of has a setup and all that stuff, and there's the in-between stuff, even some emotional beats. Infinite's whole middle section is just a vacant blur to me. They've gone so far into setting up their concept that's what happens. When you devote so much time to that and think your concept is going to be what carries you through the whole thing, you've got nothing in the middle. Like, obviously you're going to have a bunch of mindless action at the end. There's one car chase with Chiwetel, once things are kind of revealed. Once we kind of figure out that he's the villain early on, in like the first 20 minutes or so, and what's going on with him and what he wants, somewhat. It's still trying to be vague for the mystery factor, but there's no intrigue here. It's a whole big ball of who gives a fuck for most of the movie. The only thing we really get that stands out is Toby Jones has a couple scenes in this. And you look at Chiwetel and you look at Toby Jones and you're like, these are like real actors. So to see the two of them like in each other's faces being as hammy as possible, as short-lived as it is, it's like, this is basically the only reason to come here. And it's like, it maybe lasts all of 2 minutes. And then Toby Jones is out of the equation. And it's, yeah, everything else, they're trying to piece together where this egg could possibly be. And it's just a whole bunch of, oh, look at the technology we've created for this world. Like, look how creative our sci-fi world is. And it's just shit and more shit. It's like, look at our stuff. It's like someone brought you to their house and is giving you a tour, and you just do not give a shit at all. It's like, hey, look at this thing that I have. And it's like, and then this thing. It's like, yes, that is also a thing, much like the last thing. That's the middle. That's the only thing I remember about the middle. And Jason Mantzoukas is here basically giving us more information about what's going, as far as like the bodies are concerned, as far as the reincarnations go. There's obviously a point in time. This is one of those movies that has CPR in it, where the main character seems to have drowned or something, and then we just have to wait while the main character is unconscious until they regain consciousness, and then the movie can continue. But it's just sort of waiting for shit. Like, what kind of sci-fi action movie are you watching when the movie is on, and it's basically the equivalent of if, like, you're watching it at home and a friend had to go to the bathroom, so you had to pause it and just wait. But, like, the movie is on. And it's the same feeling. Like, you're just waiting for something. But, like I said, it's just like, hey, here's our concept, that's all we have. So now we just have to watch the concept go in circles until a bunch of stuff blows up at the end. And a lot of guns are fired with no tension whatsoever. So much green screen and bad CGI. And that's the thing, too, is if the effects had just been good, there could have maybe been something to these actions. Like, the action scenes could have maybe elevated it. But it's like, there's a point in time where Wahlberg's on the wing of a plane. You're never even close to buying that Wahlberg is on the wing of a plane. The big fight is he and Chiwetel falling from said plane and fighting in midair. Something Moonraker did in 1979, I think. And even then, there's not even a frame that is convincing. It is just them against a green screen and kind of a foggy background. Yes, 1979. And that's the thing, though, is that you can look at 1979, and you can also look at the fact that, look at Wahlberg on the wing of the plane, and look how fake it looks. Look at Wahlberg and Chiwetel falling from the sky, and look how fake it looks. And this is our climax. And it's like, it's one thing that it's unconvincing. It's one thing that it's bad CGI. But we also live in a time where Tom Cruise is doing this kind of shit for real all the time. Tom Cruise does this stuff as frequently as he eats fucking lunch. And so we probably shouldn't have big budget movies by now that look like this, doing scenes like this. Knowing what we can do, and what we can show, and what we can do for real, is only gonna highlight how shit movies like this look. So, when you're gonna half-ass it, we're at a time now where it's gonna show in a really bad way. And like I said, you can just tell, like, in the 90s, this would have looked so expensive. This would have looked so huge and enormous. But with what we can do now, it looks so cheap and obvious. And you can literally... It might as well be like you can see the fucking soundstage. And that's... Yeah. Oh, visible stunt doubles everywhere, too. Those are always fun. When you're watching a movie from the fucking 60s, maybe. But, yeah. So, I don't know what else. It's one of those movies where, like I said, it's one of those long drives for a short day at the beach in regards to the concept. Where it's like, hey, here's all this stuff, there's all this build-up, all this build-up. Here's your climax, we're done. That's... So now you've got all that stupid, worthless information in your head for no reason, when there's other significantly more important shit that can probably be in there. But no, the fact that they had, oh, this particular term for this particular thing, at least you know that, for whatever reason you needed to know it. And it's, well, this movie wasted your time. At least it's, I want to say it needs to be longer in order to use these things that it sets up, but it also feels like, it's like, well, I'm glad you were under 2 hours, because you were just wasting time. And at least you didn't waste over 2 hours of time. It's about maybe an hour 45 or something. Which is still too much to be wasted. But, yeah, so maybe this one sets up more like it's trying to be a franchise thing than the Tomorrow War did, but that's usually when you really fail, is when it's so obvious you're trying to set up something that's going to be bigger. Yeah, good fucking luck. Apparently this was a novel called The Reincarnationist Papers. That's such a fucking tongue twister. It's like, so, you know, I guess Infinite is a decent title by comparison, as generic as it is. You know, maybe, this is one of those cases where it's like, I can just imagine, looking at a movie like this and knowing that it's based on a novel, I can only imagine the two have so little in common, probably. Like, I can't confirm that. Like, I had not heard of this novel until this movie. But I just get the vibe that the novel and this movie probably have nearly anything in common. So, maybe the novel has better ideas that it executes better. As books, you know, have the, you know, leeway to do often. But, I don't know what the fuck this movie is, but I don't really care. So, yeah. So there's that. So, there's going to be other stuff coming, of course. More reviews, a Loki video with my brother at some point. I want to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's novel. A bunch of other stuff. Jungle Cruise is coming. yeah, it looks like the fall and like the end of summer going into the fall is going to be a lot of shit's going to be coming out. That could be really interesting. So we'll see where all of that ends up. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.